Hello, and thank you all for joining us here at our headquarters in Washington, D.C., in Ireland, Europe, and around the world. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to introduce this event featuring the Finance Minister of the Republic of Ireland and President of the Eurogroup, Paschal Donohoe. Mr. Minister, the Atlantic Council is all over town. We're doing 70 events, 22 ministers and central bank governors. And I've attended a lot of these IMF-World Bank meetings, but I've never attended in a week where I felt such relative relief that the economy is doing well and such lack of consensus over why or whether it can last. And so we're happy to bring you into this conversation. The event is part of the Atlantic Council's extensive program of events for the World Bank IMF 2025 annual meetings. Twice a year, our GeoEconomics Center aims to bring together finance ministers, central bank governors, assorted other experts from around the world to discuss their country's economic outlook and how they engage with Bretton Woods institutions. I don't have to tell any of you in the room how big the stakes are. In just a few years, thanks to our Bretton Woods 2.0 program and the leadership of our chair for international economics, Josh Lipsky, the Atlantic Council's IMF-World Bank Week program of events has become a very important forum for informed discussion that brings light, not heat, to geoeconomics debate, both on the record and off the record. The minister comes to Washington at a time of heightened uncertainty. As I said, global markets may have gotten accustomed to most of the United States reciprocal tariffs, but the past week serves as a reminder that the full spectrum of tools, from sanctions to export controls, are being used with greater frequency in less predictable way, even when it may be apparent that a final deal has been made. We have a very important set of meetings coming up between China and the Trump administration in that respect. Europe finds itself at a particularly pivotal moment. I was just in Brussels, and you had the feeling that people in the room at our Transatlantic Forum for Geoeconomics knew that Europe was on the spot, both in terms of making its economy work to produce more growth and more innovation, and to produce more for defense at the same time, and that this was a time of particular challenge for Europe. Among these pressures, Europe must not lose sight of innovation. Two of the three economists who won this year's Nobel Prize for their work on how new products and inventions drive growth and human welfare hail from the Eurozone. Ireland faces its own set of challenges. The implementation of the global minimum corporate tax at 15% does have implications for a country that has built so much of its growth model on attracting multinational investment. The escalation of U.S. tariffs on key European exports also brings uncertainty, although perhaps the minister can confirm whether the 15% rate negotiated in Scotland does or does not apply to pharmaceuticals, as that's going through the process as well. In the months ahead, the minister will play a pivotal role in shaping Europe's fiscal and economic response to these headwinds. He is not only the steward of Ireland's own fiscal policy, but also the highly respected chair of the Eurogroup, the forum that brings together the finance ministers of the Eurozone. So you speak with two very important hats at this gathering. The minister was recently reappointed for another term, a testament to his leadership and the trust his peers place in his judgment at a moment when consensus in Europe is ever more necessary and urgently required. Today's event, which is being broadcast live, is co-hosted by GeoEconomics Center and the Europe Center, led by Senior Director Jörn Fleck. Both centers are grateful to the Embassy of Ireland for its participation in our transatlantic economic dialogues, which bring together key U.S. and European policymakers and private stakeholders and aims to maintain an open and constructive dialogue between the U.S. and Europe. So, Minister Donohoe, we are deeply honored that you have chosen the Atlantic Council for this conversation, and I now turn things over to Charles Litchfield, the GeoEconomics Center's Director for Foresight and Analysis.
Thank you very much, Fred, and it's really very nice to have you with us, Mr. Minister. So there's a lot to talk about in the short time we have together, but first of all, I thought we could talk about the Eurogroup part of your mandate. So I think American audiences will be familiar with the Eurogroup's role during the financial crisis, where it did become much more prominent as a body to discuss what solutions could be. Thankfully, Europe is no longer in that financial crisis, but the Eurogroup is still, we still turn to the Eurogroup and look to the Eurogroup for guidance on what comes next and how does Europe become more competitive? What do finance ministers need to do to make sure that's possible? I know that you've recently talked about innovation in the platform of the Eurogroup, digital currencies. So if we could talk about the Eurogroup first, and then of course we'll talk about what you're here to do this week and the Irish economy.
Brilliant. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Charles, for that introduction, and to thank Fred for the opportunity to be here and to participate in an event of the Atlantic Council. So in terms of the work of the Eurogroup, we as a group of finance ministers meet every month, and we had our last meeting actually on Thursday and Friday of last week in Luxembourg. And if I was to describe the mood of us as a group of finance ministers, it would reflect how we see the economy within the euro area performing at the moment, which is it is growing. It is growing at a slightly lower pace than I suspect the American economy is, but it is characterized by a very, very high level of employment and a level of resilience that we were not able to demonstrate at other points. And it's worth making the case for that because our adjacency to economic shocks is very, very high. We are obviously right beside the economic, humanitarian and security consequences of the war in Ukraine, which had a very direct effect on the economic performance of Europe. And we were in the front line of an inflation shock that had some of its origin in the economic effects of the aftermath of the war. So I'd simply make the point that as I look at how close we have been to those shocks and to how many of them there have been, to have many European economies that now have record levels of employment and to have economies that are still growing is a stronger performance than is sometimes acknowledged. And in terms of the projects that we're working on at the moment, there are many. I'll just highlight three. The first one is to continue to get the balance right between sustainable public finances and the investment and spending needs of today. And that is the fundamental job of finance ministers, to get that balance right and to retain confidence in the future of our public finances. And there are various issues and matters that are very live there with regard to that at the moment. The second one would be the digital euro, which we reached decisions on there in our September meeting regarding how that project will be moved along. And the third one then that I hope might be relevant to this group in particular is decisions that we are working on regarding our own capital markets within the European Union and the euro area, and then our ability to invest in a different way in our own future. And that also relates to discussions that are underway regarding the future and new budget of the European Union. So very broadly, they're the different matters that we are working on at the moment. I've been a member of the Eurogroup now since 2017, and I have rarely seen such a level of solidarity and resilience as is in place now.
So speaking of solidarity and resilience, if I could push you slightly on the dynamism which we can't see in every country. So you're absolutely right that in many markets that had problems 10 to 15 years ago, there's record employment, and one of them's even been called the country of the year by The Economist. And yet in the core markets, in inverted commas, there's less dynamism and perhaps a less sustainable fiscal trajectory. So without asking you to speak specifically on the domestic politics of other member states, but since you've been there since 2017, how has the dynamic shifted? How do things feel compared to 2017 when it's the core countries that might be starting to have a few fiscal challenges and the countries that have been through reforms are actually doing quite well?
So overall, the tone and the way in which we engage with each other is something that has really evolved and changed. And I now see the efforts that individual finance ministers make and governments make to try to reach consensus on key issues being more active and been a bigger feature of our work. So that tonal change is something that's very important, and it's how we've managed to maintain a cooperative and an aligned approach to the recent very big challenges that we have faced. And then on your point, and I'm happy to speak openly on it, we have indeed a number of economies at the moment that are performing really well. The Spanish economy, the Greek economy, the Cypriot economy, the Maltese economy. These are just a few of the economies that I would highlight as performing very well at the moment. And in particular, I would look at the economy of Portugal, just to give an example of it. Its public finances are now in surplus. I would look at the levels of employment in Spain. I would look at Cyprus now as a surplus economy too. And this is, for me, proof that reform can work and that policies that are focused on building confidence and supporting jobs and economic growth are capable of making a difference. We do indeed, as you referenced there, have some of our governments that we are working with that are confronting new challenges. But I have every confidence in the ability of the French government to work their way through and find a resolution of the budget challenges that they have. I met the new Finance Minister of France at the end of last week, and I have seen at firsthand the effort that they are making to deal with their challenges. And I'm confident they will find a way through it. And then you could look at Germany, but you'd also have to look at the scale of the investment plans of Germany and the difference that's going to make to their long-term growth performance. And then you would look at an economy like Italy and see how well that economy is performing at the moment and the stability of their government. So I'll happily and openly acknowledge the challenges that are there. Maybe not happily acknowledge them, but certainly honestly acknowledge them. But in acknowledging them, I'd also make the case then for things that are working and progress that is being made.
And that includes reforms that some countries have benefited from. And so
it very much does. And I mean, if you look, for example, at the Greek economy at the moment, and it's worthwhile just highlighting them, if you look at the challenges they faced a number of years ago under Prime Minister Mitsotakis, their current Finance Minister Kyriakis, for example, the focus they have put on labour market reform, the focus they have put on digitisation, the efforts that they have made with regard to the semi-state sector, all of these are examples of reform and change that have now worked in the ability of the Greek economy in turn to grow.
Thank you. There's really so much to discuss, and I do want to speak about the Irish economy as well. Just one last question on the EU. It's less directly related to your mandate as president of the Eurogroup, but you as an Irish minister will be part of the government that takes on the presidency of the EU next year. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the agenda that you're preparing for that. I know that your delegation in Brussels is already much bigger because you're preparing very seriously for that presidency. You'll have the presidency when there's work being done on the multi-annual financial framework. Very difficult conversations also on defence and security and how we fund all of that. So I'm interested in how Ireland is preparing on all of these issues, but also specifically on security. So this is not an issue where Ireland has as high a profile as on other matters. So I'm curious how you're preparing for that.
In terms of our presidency, the two themes that we are very likely to be prioritising will be competitiveness of Europe and Ireland then in the role that we can play in the competitiveness of the EU. And then second one will be our stewardship of the negotiations with regard to the MFF, the budget of the European Union. I met the Commissioner with responsibility for the new budget, Commissioner Serafin, in Luxembourg on Friday. And it's very likely that by the time they get to the Irish presidency, we'll be at a point in which it's really taking shape and will be expected to make good progress on it. Each different minister will have their own then responsibilities underneath that rubric, and it's extremely likely that by the time we get to that point for Ireland, we will then be in a phase of negotiation with the Parliament of the European Union on the digital euro, and then on a number of capital markets big files. and I would anticipate I'll be putting a lot of my time into that. And then just on the national defence issue and where Europe stands with regard to that, we have put in place now a variety of different programmes that are supporting additional security investment in the European Union and for the people of Ukraine. And Ireland has played our role and participated in many of them, in fact in all of them. And then on a national level, our base of defence spending is low, but it's rapidly increasing. We have, for example, now just completed purchase of new airplanes for maritime surveillance. We're moving ahead now with a new radar project for Ireland, and we're moving ahead now with new investment regarding how we can keep our maritime responsibilities as safe as possible. So we are doing all of that at the moment because even though we're a neutral country, we do have security interests, and we need to do more on them at the moment for reasons you all know.
Thank you. Just one last question on the MFF. I think most people expect it to expand quite a bit. So it was 750 billion when it was last negotiated, and then COVID happened, the war in Ukraine happened, and the EU did show quite a lot of flexibility, and member states did manage to find a way to increase. But this time we know those challenges are there, and so we're talking about an MFF for the next 7 years where we know what the challenges are, hopefully. There's always a chance there are more that come. So how much bigger do you think it will have to be?
So it's difficult for me to say how much bigger it will be because that will depend on our ability to reach agreement on new forms of funding. And that is, to put it mildly, a very sensitive area. I think it is probably fair to expect that it will be bigger, but how much bigger will depend on the negotiations that are now underway. And we'll be in the middle of all that in just under, in around a year's time.
Hopefully you can update us.
I suspect I'll be able to give you a far more informed update at that point. Yes, absolutely.
Look forward to that, Minister. So sorry for burying the lead on the Irish economy, which is something that we follow very closely at the Atlantic Council. And it also is one of the examples of a country that managed to get through a difficult period through reform and is now seen as an example. While it is still seen as an example, it also faces its own set of challenges, some of which come from this side of the Atlantic. So the tariffs have been digested by the markets at this point, I think better than many of us thought. But then there are specific characteristics of the Irish economy, which sometimes the Trump administration or members of the Trump administration have been critical of. The way Ireland has been very attractive to multinationals does mean that Ireland is a bridge between the US and the EU economies. But then there are members of the Trump administration that want to reform how tax works in the US so that more of that income is channeled to the US Treasury. So this may be a question that I should ask to them and not to you, because it's a lot to do with US tax and how it works. But I'm just curious how you're preparing for this and how you're working with US multinationals based in Ireland to make sure they continue to see Ireland as a good place to work.
So an opening point to make is that any tax revenue, any investment flows that come into Ireland are associated with real concrete investment. And that real concrete investment in turn allows American companies to be very active within the European Union, to sell into and to be competitive within the European Union, and in turn is part of the global supply chains that play an important role in the profitability of these companies. And of course, we are well aware of the very strong commitment that is there from President Trump's administration to look at how that can be rebalanced. And we accept that, and we are working through the European Union on that. So how does that look like? What does that look like? So the first one is the amount of investment that Irish companies have here in America. So we at the moment have around 200,000 jobs that are associated with Irish or companies that are based in Ireland that are investing in America. And we know and we are aware of the role that we have to play in ensuring that those companies are playing a positive role in the economic future of America. And that's underway, and I can see it happening with my own eyes. Secondly then, the work that we are doing with America and with many other countries with regarding to the OECD process and how we can ensure that issues that are of concern are dealt with in a way that is cooperative and durable. And I've been working on that process now for 8 years, and I expect it's going to continue for some time yet. And then thirdly, we've already made big changes in our tax code now to deal with issues that may have been a cause of concern in the past. So we've increased our minimum tax rate. It's gone up to 15%. We've done that through a directive of the European Union. Many of the different issues that had been raised regarding the interplay between the Irish tax code and tax codes in other parts of the world, we've changed the detail of our tax code in regard to that. But where we are now is we have an economy that's open, that is competitive, that has a high level of investment within it, and that wants to play a role as being a bridge between the US and the European Union, and believes in competitiveness. And we will work in the with the US and within the EU to see how we can deal with issues that have been of concern. And we've done a lot of that work now.
Have you seen a shift in how multinationals deal with you? Are they asking more questions? Are they nervous about the environment that they're operating under?
I certainly see a high level of caution regarding the environment that we're in. I don't believe that is specific to the Irish relationship. I believe it's a consequence of a very different global trading environment that we're in. And the questions that companies ask me in Ireland, I know they're asking my peers in other European countries. And in terms of how they are engaging with Ireland, because we try to conduct ourselves in a way that is predictable, open, and focused on the long term, those companies tend to have an understanding of how we make policy decisions, though the policy decisions are always made independently of them. And then we try to engage with those companies in a way that is open and appropriate. And I think we have found ways of maintaining that approach despite all of the different issues that you've highlighted in our discussion.
Thank you. So I really wish we had more time, and I have two more important questions to ask you before we have to conclude. The first is on investment by the Irish government in infrastructure in Ireland.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that finance ministers have to navigate between day-to-day spending, long-term infrastructure spending, and then keeping a sustainable fiscal trajectory. I think most people admire how sustainable Ireland's trajectory has become. But on the investment point, I know there is some frustration in Irish public opinion about investment, the need for more investment, the need for more housing. So I was wondering how you're trying to respond to these challenges while keeping the broader constraints in mind.
The investment challenge for Ireland and how we rise to it is an essential element of our economic agenda. Capital investment within our economy for 2026 will be just over 19 billion euro. That will be just over 5% of national income. When I started off as Finance Minister for Ireland, that figure was 3.6, 3.7 billion euro. So it's exponentially increased, albeit off a very low base. But as important as the money and investment is, what is as important are the decisions that we make from a planning and policy perspective to help that money flow into faster pace of execution. And I would say at the moment that is our number one priority. Energy, water, transport, and then building more homes, and how we can use our public finances to enable us to do that across the next number of years. We need to do that for social reasons. We need to do that because we want Ireland to be a better country for those who live in it, those who work in it. But we also need to do it for economic reasons, because that in turn creates a platform and a framework of certainty to help us ameliorate and moderate to a degree some of the challenges that are building around us.
Thank you very much. So the final question is on the week ahead, or we're already halfway through, hard to believe. You're a regular now at the World Bank, IMF spring and annual meetings. April, I think, was all to do with dealing with some of the uncertainties coming from the US, and some of those have been digested now. So I was wondering what you're hoping to achieve this week. What are your goals? What are the conversations you're hoping to have?
So what I'm hoping to achieve is exactly events like this, because it's always so valuable to be in an environment like this, to explain what's happening in Ireland, to offer a view about Europe, and to learn from those who are here. The question that I have at the moment would be one of sustainability, trying to better understand what is happening in our global economy at the moment and trying to assess whether we have moved through a shock or whether a new one awaits.
Understood. So you like being in Washington?
It is a great place to be, and these meetings and these kind of engagements are of huge help and importance.
Well, we're very grateful for your time.
And thank you for having
coming
me
to
on.
see us. And it's always a great pleasure for us to have Irish finance ministers. There's been quite a turnover recently, which has nothing to do with political instability and all to do with good collaboration in coalition politics in Ireland. So we're very happy. This is my third Irish finance minister that I've interviewed in less than 2 years. But again, nothing to do with political instability. So we acknowledge that Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason is here, so thank you very much for coming with the Minister, Madam Ambassador, and thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for coming to see us.
Thank you
Always
for having
welcome
me
back
on.
at the Atlantic
Thank you
Council.
very much.
Thank you.